To start by paying condolences to Dr. Ali Al-Najjar. Dr. Al-Najjar works in Sligo University Hospital. On Friday, his sister-in-law, Alaa, a paediatrician in Can Yunis, said goodbye to her husband, Hamdi, and their 10 children before she went to work to care for injured babies who barely survived Israeli attacks. But after Israeli airstrikes a few hours later, 7 of her children's charred bodies came to her hospital, while 2 couldn't be found under the rubble. Only 1 of her 10 children survived, along with her husband, who is now missing an arm, has brain damage and has serious shrapnel wounds in his chest. 9 children, under 12 years of age, all murdered by Israel, all while their mother worked to save the lives of other children. How does a family possibly recover from that, Taoiseach? This is a genocide made in America, armed, funded, supported by President Trump and President Biden before him. We need action on top of words now from this government. Taoiseach, we need Occupied Territories Bill, goods and services, we need to stop the overflights, and we need to ban Israeli bonds.
In respect of Gaza and the Middle East, the discussion on the Northern Ireland peace process was such that the President was drawing parallels between the intensity and ferocity of the violence in Northern Ireland, the horrific crime, bombings that killed so many innocent people and so many innocent civilians, was not unlike what was then happening in the Middle East. Although in the Middle East, it's going for a prolonged period. But the point is that we said the peace process in Northern Ireland is a potential model to be used in the Middle East, and that you can deconflictualize a society and you can create pathways to peace. And a two-state solution, in our view, is the optimal way forward, notwithstanding the policies of the Netanyahu government. In terms of Shannon, Deputy Murphy has raised that. You raised the issue of Shannon for deportation. Again, the Minister for Foreign Affairs is investigating that, along with the Minister for Transport. In terms of, there are basic frameworks and international agreements around the landing of planes for civilian purposes, but this is an issue that we will inquire further into, and it's not immediately clear from the international framework agreements in terms of this issue how one can address it, but we will examine it further and come back. I would say, in respect of Deputy Murphy, I would sympathise and join with him, with Dr. Al-Najjar, in terms of his sister-in-law, who has lost 9 children. And the slaughter of children will come to define Israel's inhumanity to fellow human beings, in this case Palestinians in Gaza. It is beyond any moral comprehension that such indiscriminate bombing can take place, or takes place, killing thousands of children and thousands of innocent civilians, destroying families. And the US has significant power here and influence over Israel. Some countries in the European Union have been historically supporters of the state of Israel for historic reasons, Germany being one, although I note the German Chancellor's remarks yesterday in respect of the behaviour of the Israeli government. This government is not just fine words. We have taken very practical steps insofar as we can and in the areas that we can. And I would argue, contrary to what Deputy Coppinger said, I wouldn't withdraw from the EU. I would try and do more within the EU to bring more people along to the proper course of actions that need to be taken. But on our own, we're not going to change a whole lot there, if you want to be brutally honest about it. I think within the European Union, we can change. And we were effective on UNRWA, for example. I would argue very strongly, when there was a big move on to take funding away from UNRWA, we intervened and we doubled down and we increased our funding significantly. And we said at the Foreign Affairs Council, and I said to myself, don't go along with the herd to other countries. Don't withdraw your funding. And there has been changes within the European Union's response to that issue, the funding of UNRWA, but also to the funding of the Palestinian Authority. And the European Union remains the biggest donor to the Palestinian cause at the moment. It's the biggest donor in the world to the Palestinian Authority. And we can't forget that either. So you just, it's very challenging, very frustrating, because we have a clear view, but not everybody looks at it through the prism that we look at it through. And there is a huge journey to bring other countries with us in respect of this horrific war and horrific event. And we also work with the United Nations. We've been very active in the courts, not words, very active in the ICC, very active in the ICJ on a number of fronts, active in the Genocide Convention in terms of a very well-composed legal argument around, in terms of the criteria judging a genocide, inviting the court to look at access to humanitarian aid and conduits for humanitarian aid and intention and so on. So those are actions, Deputy, and I know you, on that side of the House, you're very anxious to try and just, oh, it's all fine words and no action. These are very sustained, sort of pragmatic actions that are within our power to do and that can have impact. And we will continue to do that on a number of issues. Recognition was an act. It wasn't fine words, it was an act of recognition of the Palestinian state, which provoked a significant response and opposition, by the way, from the Israeli government and others who support the Israeli government. Agus in tíim le tachtam ó muoine cháin asacht an méad dúirte faoi Gaza agus an brú file atá cosfaointear Gaza de dheasca an cogaí bhú fásach atá ón fí láthir agus ggóthaigh tuaisceart na hÉireann bhí cainteanna samúil a going le Uachtarán Trump go háide an trí in a rómar inán clóisios síochána a chud a bhain. On the trade issues, Deputy Moynihan, as well, the fundamental issue of the interconnection of supply chains between the US and the European Union was discussed. In other words, this is not simple. Modern supply chains are very complex, and you just can't put up a barrier because it can affect the manufacture of goods, the raw materials that are imported to enable you to produce a product, and so on. The Legacy Act was another issue that we discussed with the congressional leaders, in particular, as well as the trade and Northern Ireland. That were the three big issues with the congressional leaders that we discussed. Deputy Byrne, Malcolm Byrne, raised the issue of recent decisions in terms of Harvard. It is surprising the degree to which education has been targeted in higher education, but Minister James Lawless's initiative in terms of attracting international scholars and researchers from the US and elsewhere to Ireland, I think is a good initiative. We've already, in the past, attracted some very significant scholars and research teams to Ireland, who in turn then produce products and ideas that can feed into industry and help to create jobs in our economy. And Deputy Carroll raised a number of issues, again, the tariff and trade issues that I discussed earlier. And I would hope that with serious negotiation we can get a deal that will benefit European consumers and citizens and United States consumers as well.
Thank you, Taoiseach.